What's up, everybody? Welcome to the PickSix podcast, CBS Sports Daily NFL podcast. I'm Will Brinson. I'm your host. It is Friday, July the 2nd. Wow, does time really fly? And we are looking at the top safeties in the NFL with our buddy Tyler Sullivan. Sully, what's up, buddy?
What's going on, Will?
Isn't it fun to hop in the time machine and fly all the way? I'm just kidding. Sometimes we record these. Sometimes we don't record these the exact day of. They're rankings. They're evergreen. You can do it. It's the off season.
I'm actually time traveling backwards. I'm already at the 4th of July. I'm at my cookout. It's great. It's a good time. You guys will have fun.
America! Anyway, we're going to look at the top 10 safeties. Who were your toughest names to leave off from the top 10 safety list?
I mean, this one was tough. I mean, we've done the offensive line one already, and we've talked about how it was difficult to kind of parse these things. Safety was no different. And this one, I think I leave it off much bigger names. Jamal Adams, not inside this top 10. Budda Baker, not inside this top 10. Those are probably the ones that a lot of people are going to look at and say, what are you smoking? What are you on? But when you look at the people that made it, again, this isn't to discredit, Jamal Adams. This isn't to discredit Budda Baker, two unbelievable players at their position. But when you get to the nitty gritty of the best of the best, you're splitting hairs. That's really what you're at here. So those are the two names I think I'll probably get the most flack for. I mean, I'm not throwing Antoine Winfield Jr. in there after 1 year, but he's an honorable mention. He's someone who I'm like, had a great year, first year in the league, helped Tampa Bay get to a Super Bowl. But I'm not going to go so boldly to say, oh, he's already a top 10 guy in the league.
All right, fair enough. And yeah, I mean, people are going to, Kevin Byard, famous interactions with like, hey, you stay the fan. You keep being a fan. I'll keep being the man. Deion Sanders once told him on Twitter. He's like, actually, Deion, I'm a starting all-pro safety for the Tennessee Titans. And Deion apparently had no idea who Kevin Byard was, which
that's great.
Probably says more about Deion than Kevin Byard. Mike Hyde. Yeah, I say so too. Minkah Hyde and Jordan Poyer of the Bills, both nice players, could have made it on there. Darnell Savage took a big leap forward too as well. Anthony Harris, a cheap signing for the Eagles, but another current Minnesota guy that would make more sense. At 10, yeah, I like this because you're projecting a little bit to next year and hoping that injuries don't take another season of Derwin James away from us. Derwin James could be number one on this list.
Right, and so even just going back to like, if you want to take out Derwin James and throw in Budda Baker or throw in Jamal Adams or anybody, like, I'm not going to fight you that hard. I honestly just think this one's a little bit more fascinating to talk about and to write about. Like, there's a case to be made, like you're saying, where we're sitting here next year and Derwin James is the best safety in the NFL because we saw just a quick little flash of it, when he was in his rookie year. Comes out of the gate, first team All-Pro, racks up over 100 tackles, is just an absolute monster. But injuries have completely. It's been sad, really. It's like a sad turn in his career because you look at that Chargers defense, and if you add somebody like that to it, I mean, I don't know if I'm going to say that they're competing with the Chiefs, but if Herbert continues and James gets there, I mean, you gotta like what the Chargers are putting together there. So the injuries are the biggest thing. If he can stay away from it, if he can get that injury bug from stop biting him, you're talking about a guy that's easily top 5 talent-wise. But
he's the number one safety in the league if he's healthy. I mean, he had his first season as a rookie. He was an All-Pro at age 22, had 3.5 sacks, 100 tackles, 3 picks. I mean, freaking 4 tackles for loss, 6 quarterback hits. I mean, dude's a beast. He's an all-around player, sort of a souped-up Jamal Adams. No offense to Jamal Adams. And I agree with him there. I think you will probably catch a lot of flack for not having Budda Baker on there.
Yeah.
And it's probably deserved.
Yeah, I get it. And, listen, I believe he was an all-pro last year, stud. And again, you want to put him at 10 and you want to move James down. That's totally, totally fine. I get the idea of it. But when I'm looking at James, I'm looking at a guy, like you're saying, like, could be the best of the best. And I don't want to sit here a year from now and go, like, I don't think
you don't want Derwin James to have a full 16 games and then you didn't have him on the list.
Right, exactly. I don't want to put he who must not be named, who didn't put Aaron Rodgers in the top 10 last year going into it.
So clearly that gets a good laugh around the NFL Slack chat.
Well, yeah. I got a good laugh to myself listening to the pod earlier in the car, so that was good.
Good for Cody Benjamin for blasting he who shall not be named for that. That was a bad mistake. Number 9, Adrian Amos. You have him of the Packers and Harrison Smith of the Vikings at number 8. Little NFC North flavor there.
Yeah, and Amos, I mean, he was the highest graded safety in coverage last year according to PFF. I mean, he's somebody who's helping solidify that back end of the defense there for Green Bay. So to me, it just made sense when you're talking about somebody on a team that has been in the NFC Championship and knocking on the door of a Super Bowl. You kind of have to give that some credit. I understand that, it's not all predicated on team success there, but when you're talking about, pairing him with Darnell Savage and Jair Alexander, that's a pretty good secondary. I know it gets a lot of flack for like Kevin King screwing up a lot of it in the NFC Championship, but we're talking about a unit that's been pretty solid there and someone who's really been a durable piece. I believe it was 100% of the snaps fairly recently, and I think 98% of the offensive snaps last year. Like, he's been somebody who you can rely on a week in, week out basis, who I think is actually a little underrated.
Yep. Yeah, that's that. I have no problem with that. Again, like the Budda Baker thing too. Budda Baker's, score or like, overall numbers and sort of highlights are pumped up because he is a big guy against the run, and he has gotten better against the pass. But certainly, both those guys, key components to those NFL defenses. Marcus Williams at number 7 for you. Another member that too that we talked about this at the offensive lineman. The 2017 class just changed everything for the Saints.
Yeah, and I mean, he's allowed a 61.5 completion percentage when targeted last year. He's just one of the better overall players at the position, obviously. But what I think is interesting too is that he very rarely, like, even when he allows a completed pass, he's getting his guys down. He's not missing tackles. A 4.8% missed tackle rate, like, absolutely nothing. He's finishing off these guys, even if they're able to haul in the pass there. So to me, one of the anchors to that defense, New Orleans is for a while now had a pretty good defense, but to me, I think that he's one of the key reasons why.
And credit too to Marcus Williams for bouncing back from the Minneapolis Miracle. That that's the sort of thing that could ruin a dude's mental psyche.
That is something where, like, it's a Bill Buckner. It's one of those that just absolutely gets played on a loop, and you never really recover. You become a cast out to the franchise fan base. Like, that's something that can completely change you. Credit to him. I mean, dating back to 2019, he's the second highest graded guy in PFF's metrics. So, you really can't say more about him.
No, you really can't. Marcus May, franchise tagged this offseason by the New York Jets. One of the very few blue chip guys that Jets team has on the roster. Quinn Williams, Mekhi Becton, Marcus May, and Zach Wilson, Elijah Moore. I mean, it's a pretty short list, but Marcus May definitely on there, the number 6 safety for you.
Yeah, and it was interesting because I think everybody was paying a lot of attention to the safety position for the Jets because Jamal Adams wanted out, and you're kind of like, okay, like, this franchise guy, face of your defense wants out. What are you going to do? Well, Marcus May comes in here and shows that he can be a versatile piece. He had a career year. He was, total pass breakups, total tackles, sacks, forced fumbles, all career highs for him. He was, according to PFF's grading system, he was the 4th highest graded safety last year. I mean, it was, by all accounts, a tremendous, uptick in his, I don't want to say play, because I still feel like he's played well, but he was given more opportunity, able to showcase it and prove that he can be a bigger piece of this defense going forward, which I think is actually sneaky underrated. I think their front seven's pretty good, and if May can solidify that back end, the Jets defense, it really isn't much to squawk at.
It too, like, maybe get a little bit of coaching in there. Yeah. Robert Saleh, I mean, come in and I mean,
true.
But they have
defensive-minded coach. It just changes the overall culture of it. That's a good point.
Or as we like to say, not Adam Gase.
Right. Usually good things happen when he leaves.
That's right. Almost always good things happen. John Johnson III, one of the big free agent signings for the Browns this offseason as they attempted to beef up their defense, checks in at number 5 for you.
Yep. Again, one of the sneaky, underrated moves that the Browns have done over the last few years. It's not like it's this like big splash, big name, not like the Odell Beckhams of the world. It more reminds me of like a defensive version of the Jack Conklin signing, where it's, this guy should fit your system pretty well. The change is going to be interesting with any of these guys switching teams. How are they going to fit within this defense, as opposed to, we're basing it off of all of these productions from another franchise, another system, another defense. How is it going to translate? I personally think it's going to translate well. I mean, he's been one of these guys that has just been an absolute stud. I believe he allowed 6.4 yards per completion, 4.4 yards per target last year. That's very low for someone that plays deep in the secondary. So, I just like everything about that move. And I don't think it gets enough credit, similar to Conklin last year, when we're talking about the Browns possibly making that leap to a AFC championship, possibly even Super Bowl appearance.
Yeah. And I like what the Browns did in terms of the offseason, because they focused on getting the offense where it needed to be, especially in the offensive line, and then tight end, key positions in this offense where, with what Kevin Stefanski wants to do last season, so Baker Mayfield could get right.
Yeah.
And then they said, all right, we got some holes here on defense. Let's see if we can plug them in the offseason, either through the draft or, through some smart free agent signings. They did just that. And John Johnson, a really nice pickup in terms of a off-season grab. It's just, I think the Rams would have wanted to keep him around, because that defense,
they were just in so much cap disarray and things like that, where it was tough to kind of keep a guy like that, especially when you're looking at a Jalen Ramsey and Aaron Donald. I mean, you're already investing a lot of money on that defensive side of the ball, and the case to be made for the Rams keeping him is that you don't have draft capital to kind of replace that production. But when push comes to shove, cap wise, it's too tough.
Exactly. All right, let's take a quick break. When we come back, 2 more AFC North safeties on the list for Tyler Sullivan. Jesse Bates the third, maybe the most. Is he quickly morphing from the most underrated NFL player, an underrated player in the NFL, to he's sort of like the Robert Woods of defensive players, where now everyone is saying he's the most underrated player. Therefore, he's
he's overrated. It wasn't even really for me to put him inside the top 5. Like, oh, is he overrated or he's underrated? I was more afraid of Breach flying to Massachusetts, knocking on my door and saying, why is he not higher on this list? And I'm probably still going to get that at some point, which is totally fine. I'd welcome him in with open arms. Have a few beers. I'm sure it would be fun. But Bates, again, has been somebody who has been just a statistical darling. Doesn't get a lot of pump because, he's getting a lot of pump now, but doesn't get a lot of, I think, exposure from the average NFL fan.
He went to Wake Forest, drafted in the second round. He plays for the Bengals. He's just not a household name.
So it's just one of those things where they're not in contention. You're not seeing him on these primetime games like a Minkah Fitzpatrick, who we'll talk about in a second. Like, that's, you're just not seeing him. But when you peel it back, he was, second team All-Pro. He was the highest graded safety last year, according to PFF. He's allowed opposing quarterbacks to complete just 54.3% of their passes. He had a passer rating allowed of 70.7. I mean, you're talking about a career year, 15 pass breakups. He's emerging into somebody who eventually, I think everybody will know, and eventually could even be one of the higher players even higher on this list. But, it's just, we haven't seen much of him in these primetime games, as opposed to these guys that are a little bit higher on this list, or at least some of them.
Yep. Minkah Fitzpatrick, number 3. He's sort of solidified mostly thanks to Pete Prisco snubbing off the top 100. It feels like now, because of that whole discussion last offseason, that people are sort of obsessed with making sure that Minkah Fitzpatrick is properly rated. And you certainly have him properly rated here at number 3.
And so I think 1 through 3 is the tier. I think that's the top tier. Bates, maybe is creeping into this tier, but I almost want to put him as the best of the next tier. But when you're talking about Fitzpatrick and the other guys that we'll mention, I think you can make a case for either one of them moving up or moving down, whatever you want to do. Fitzpatrick, first full season in Pittsburgh, but the second he got there in 2019, it almost completely changed how that defense looked. They were already great with TJ Watt, and they already had playmakers, but they didn't have a guy like that who was, I think I wrote, it almost made them a more opportunistic defense. It feels like they're always ripe for a turnover that completely changes the scope of a game. And Fitzpatrick is one of those guys. I mean, again, second team All-Pro last year, just an overall completes the back end of that defense, completely complements what they do on the front seven. So to me, it was a no-brainer to make him top 3. I almost even want to put him even higher, but as I'm debating with myself in my head, these other 2 guys, I think that I felt just a little bit more stronger.
Yeah, and Minkah's I would take Derwin over Minkah, but you would definitely take Minkah's career over Derwin's career so far. Just
right.
Even though Minkah traded, Minkah's played more games. And he struggled a little bit out of the gate last year. Pete Prisco's peacocking. I told you end up 100, and then he poured it on and helped the Steelers, get out to that 11-0 start. Flies all over the place, hard hitting beast, and finished with 4 picks, has 11 interceptions on his career in just 3 years already.
And when he was targeted, allowed a 50% completion percentage. I mean, it's a coin flip when a quarterback tries to throw in his direction. Yeah, it's pretty good, I would say.
It's one of those two where the Steelers gave up a first-round pick for him, and
I thought it was dumb. I thought it was dumb at the time.
I did too.
I was sitting there saying, you got to remember, Ben Roethlisberger went down for the year with his elbow injury.
The Steelers are going to finish like 3-12 or 3.
I had no idea what it was going to be, and you go, really? You're a buyer right now. You're bringing in this player, and truth be told, who knows what that pick could have turned out to be? I don't remember exactly where it ended up, but because they ended up making a push for the playoffs when they ended up getting Fitzpatrick.
They were just short. Well, the Dolphins ended up drafting Austin Jackson with
what was that, like
18th overall.
18, okay.
Yeah, so I mean, you could make the case that you could have drafted Justin Jefferson, Kenneth Murray, Brandon Ayuk, Cesar Ruiz, but I mean, Minkah Fitzpatrick's going ahead of all those guys in the draft.
But also, would they still be there at number 18 had they not gone after Minkah Fitzpatrick? Again, that changed a lot of
defense, brought their defense to life.
And I mean, they were winning games with Duck Hodges, so it was I don't think you're winning those games in particularly without a legitimate ball hawk playmaker like Fitzpatrick. So again, that's something that you can debate late, when we're talking about the Steelers trying to figure out the quarterback position after Ben Roethlisberger goes away. But in the immediate, it made them a much better defense, a much better football team. So you can't hate the move again. He's a top 3 safety in the league.
Yep. And number 2, the Honey Badger, the Honey Badger.
Tyrann Mathieu.
What was that, Breach?
Tyrann Mathieu.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that, Breach.
Tyrann Mathieu.
Yes, that's right. Tyrann Mathieu of the Chiefs. He is just it's weird how his career's evolved, Sully, from guy who's kicked out of LSU, redemption story in the NFL, has bounced around, was drafted by Arizona, Bruce Arians, Steve Keim, take him there as a nice pick. There were a lot of questions about him. Ends up, they don't sign him they sign him to a big contract, but then they let him go. Signs with the Texans on a 1-year prove-it deal. Signs with the Chiefs and has blossomed into borderline annual defensive player of the year. And he does it all. He's a beast, and he's just a different kind of football player than really anyone else.
Yeah, and you look at it from the faces standpoint. Obviously, you're talking about Patrick Mahomes, Andy Reid, Travis Kelce, Tyreek Hill. When you're talking about this era of Kansas City Chiefs football, but when you go on the defensive side of the ball, it's Mathieu. He is the guy that you think of as the face of that defense. There are obviously other guys, Chris Jones and all that, but when you look at what Tyrann Mathieu has put to the table, I almost said Mathieu.
The soundbite has caused me, because I've heard it so many times.
I almost did it.
Hey, it a lot, yeah.
But regardless if I say his name correctly or incorrectly, one thing I can say correctly is that he is an absolute stud. They're almost similar to Fitzpatrick in the sense that playmaking ability, feels like he could swing a game at any moment with the turnover, and he's come up clutch with the Chiefs over the course of his tenure there. And this past year, all pro season, what was it, 62.7 completion percentage when targeted, a 60.2 passer rating when targeted. It's just, he's a very complete player, can elevate when you need to be when the team needs to be elevated. And it's just one of those things where you'd be silly if you didn't put him, inside the top 2.
And I would always argue that some of the stuff you see from safeties now, in particular a Minkah Fitzpatrick type, a Jamal Adams, a Derwin James, that not that they're exactly the same, but the Honey Badger was at LSU in 2010 and 2011, got kicked off campus. He was a phenomenon when he was at LSU, and I think that there's a good case to be made that some of these guys sort of develop their playing styles, the all around, move all over, modern safety. Budda Baker too, and even like all these guys sort of come from that same mold. And I sort of wonder if he isn't the guy who helped to sort of create this new breed of safety that's now populating the entire NFL.
That's certainly the case. And there's also one thing that I wanted to mention quickly with Mathieu. It reminds me a little bit, and it's different because they had won Super Bowls prior to this move, New England. But New England, when they got Rodney Harrison, it completely changed kind of the attitude in the face of that defense.
Yeah.
And it's kind of, for someone who saw that dynasty up close, it really, they're not the same player, but it just draws a lot of similarities as it elevated the unit. It elevated them into a stratosphere where they're contending for Super Bowls, and you feel a little bit more confident about that defense going forward. And again, there's a lot more faces to that. Snead's another one who's up and coming at the corner spot. That could be a solid secondary for them. But Mathieu right now is the guy. And it's going to be interesting. Again, free agent going into a contract year. We'll see how it pans out, see if he's on the Chiefs going forward. But Patrick Mahomes has already said, I'd like him to be here for as long as I'm here. And I feel like when you get that type of endorsement, that probably happens pretty quickly.
Yeah. And how is he only – he just turned 29 back in May. Feels like that's how it feels like
he's been on the stage forever. Like you were saying, LSU, it feels like we've known him forever.
Exactly. At the top of the list, Justin Simmons of the Denver Broncos, sort of a really nice culmination for him. Great player anyway, but when you have Vic Fangio come into town, he fits like you see this in all these Vic Fangio defenses where safeties just thrive in this defense, and he's really done that the last 2 years, playing exceptional football. Made his first Pro Bowl in 2020, under the radar guy in terms of how he's treated from a national perspective. I think everyone, if who's the best safety in football, you're getting the Honey Badgers.
I think you're getting the Honey Badger. I think you're getting Fitzpatrick. I think that I think along with Budda Baker and Jamal Adams, which I can understand. I thought this was going to give me the most heat too. Why, how isn't Fitzpatrick, the number one guy? How isn't, Tyrann Mathieu the top guy? But,
through it. You're fighting that decision.
I'm really going. I'm like Logan Paul and Mayweather. It's just really going at it. It's great. But when you look at Justin Simmons, I mean, it's just. It almost just, it's like a tidal wave when you look at all of the body of work that he's put together there. I mean, over the last 2 years, PFF's top graded safety at the position. I believe he's only one of two safeties. I believe it's him and Mathieu, who have had 12 interceptions in the regular season. Another one of those guys you wouldn't think, but very opportunistic, is able to be a ball hawk when he's needed to. He's pretty good in the slot. He can do a lot of things in that defense. And when you start to look at what that secondary is going to start to look like, maybe even as early as this year, if Patrick Surtain pops as a rookie, if Kyle Fuller can return to form from what we saw in Chicago with Vic Fangio, I mean, to me, that is something where I think we're sleeping on the Denver secondary a little too much. I know that Simmons is the number one guy for me, but there's a lot of pieces that I like going into this year where they can maybe, I'm not saying they're going to contend for a title or anything, or contend for the division that is also, with Patrick Mahomes and Justin Herbert. But if you get Aaron Rodgers, that's a great spot to be in.
I mean, you look at the Broncos and it's hard to find a weakness outside. Maybe you could look at their front, the defensive line, and it's just quarterback. Like if you put Aaron Rodgers on this team, they're not favored over the Chiefs, but they're not huge dogs behind the.
Right. I mean, I said this in our previous podcast about the offensive lineman. I was talking about Washington being kind of like Tampa light, Tampa 2.0. Denver's the same way. I mean, they have more quarterbacks at their disposal. It's not Ryan Fitzpatrick. They have a young guy in Locke, a veteran in Bridgewater that they're trying to figure out. But if you're like this Rodgers type figure entering free agency, you're looking at Denver saying, okay, this is a spot I want to be because it's plug and play. I have so many weapons, a great defense. Maybe
Drew Lock is that MFer that Tom Brady was talking about.
It could have been. Could have been.
Really? What? You went with him?
I think it was it wasn't Jimmy G. Everybody says Jimmy G. I don't know. I think it was probably, I saw a Coward say Trubisky. That one made a little bit more sense to me because there was some interest maybe with Chicago. You're like, really? You're going with Trubisky? I like that theory.
It could definitely be him. The
Boston radio theory, if you really want it quickly, I know this has nothing to do with safeties, but the Boston radio theory was that he was talking about Belichick, and it was a conversation between him and Kraft. It wasn't.
Oh, no, that's spicy.
That was a fun one, but I don't know how legit that one is. But I liked it, so sure, why not?
Debo, put a note down that we need to have Sully back on for a separate Tom Brady podcast on the conspiracy theories about who Tom Brady was talking about.
Let's do a top 10. Let's do it.
Top 10, yes, that's right. Top 10 guy, top 10 people Tom Brady could have been talking about. Excellent work on the safeties as well as the offensive line earlier. over the weekend. Sully, enjoy your 4th, buddy. Go America. Great job. You deserve a break for all the hard work you put in. Appreciate it, pal.
Thank you, America.